huge update just dropped for Path of Titans. Like, really huge. It contains tons of bug fixes, balance changes, new abilities, and of course, the Lamb TLC. But there were some pretty noteworthy changes that were slid in under the radar and weren't listed in the patch notes. Here are the 5 biggest shadow changes I've noticed in-game that didn't appear in the patch notes. Starting off with number 5, we have shadow settings, no pun intended. Now, this one was partially listed in the patch notes, where they mentioned they brightened up fog and night lighting on lower settings, but what they didn't mention was that high settings got changed as well. High shadow settings are actually extremely dark now at night. I think this might be an unintended byproduct of the lighting changes for the other settings. If you've watched my streams at all, you've probably caught me talking about how high shadow settings are by far the best for being able to see at night. Well, not anymore. You're probably going to want to crank the shadows down to low. The difference is absolutely crazy. Coming in at number 4, we have server stability and player count. This was something the devs briefly mentioned, but didn't go into much detail on. The previous queue limit for a server was 81 players, with a few slots reserved on top of that for players joining off their friends. You would rarely see a server of over 84 or 85 players, and when the player count started to get that high, the server tick rate would heavily drop, and dinos would start rubber banding all over the place. Quick note, for those of you unfamiliar with tick rate is how often a server updates information in times per second. So Path of Titans 60 tick servers should refresh 60 times per second when stable. For reference, I've seen server tick rates drop as low as 15, 10, or even 5 when the player count gets into the mid 80s. But now, servers seem to be in the 90 to 95 player range on average, and I haven't seen the tick rate fluctuate even once. Big kudos to the devs here. The server performance improvements are fantastic so far. No more teleporting packies. Moving on to number 3, we have auto run bugs. At least I think this is not intended. Previously, when auto running, you could tap any movement key and instantly take control of your dino again without slowing down. Now, if you try to do this, it seems to get stuck between walking when you try to run and running when you try to walk. This creates a very janky transition back into controlling your dino and often results in you having to fully stop moving to regain control. This is a big bummer for me because I use auto run frequently in fights when I need to quickly clip something and still be moving forward. Now, with having to stop before regaining full control, it's a huge momentum killer and can easily lead to a deadly movement mistake. At number 2, we have resting regen changes. This may be a little more niche, but it's something that I do all the time, so I noticed it instantly. It used to be that when you rested and then stood up, you would keep regenerating stamina at an improved rate until you had finished the stand-up animation. Now, pretty much as soon as you tap a key or button and begin to stand up, you switch to the standing regen rate instantly. This is a bit sad because you'll have to spend a little more time on the ground when fully resting than you would have had to before. I want to briefly include an honorable mention before we get to number 1. With the footstep audio rework, crouch walking is obviously a lot quieter, but what is interesting is that the sound reduction seems to be momentum based. So if you're running up hills, the steeper the hill, the quieter you'll be. Keep this in mind if you're trying to make a quick, stealthy getaway. Going up might actually be your best bet if you want to maintain some speed and move quietly. And lastly, coming in at number 1, we have PvP deaths only knock you down a quarter bar now. That is right. If you die fighting, you're only out a quarter bar of growth, not a half bar anymore. This is a pretty big change because changing the punishment for death will probably make players a little more eager to jump into fights than they previously were. Out of combat deaths, like dying from fall damage, only put you down about 1/8 of a bar now, as opposed to the previous quarter. Not having to quest much to get back to adult is pretty nice, although you do feel like you're wasting a trophy a bit if you decide to grow back on that instead of questing. But as you can see in these examples, I managed to get fully back to adult only off of 2 solo quests when I died from fall damage, and when I died from a PvP death, it only took me 3 solo quests, which is not much time at all. So I hope you all found this video helpful. If you all would like me to make a video going over the patch notes in their entirety, I absolutely can. I just figured many other creators would be covering the patch notes as well, and I wanted to bring something a bit different to the table, so I chose this video. Anyhow, I've been your host, Conwar. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one.